to our first speaker, Maureen Spill, nutritionist at the Center for Policy and Promotion, U.S. Department of Agriculture. Interesting.
All right, so today I'm going to do a quick overview, a little bit of background on the Dietary Guidelines for Americans and the Nutrition Evidence Library, which is the team that I work with, and then talk through the NEL, or Nutrition Evidence Library Systematic Review Process, which is pretty much the scientific review that then informs the dietary guidelines. I'm going to highlight some strengths and potential areas for modifications. And then I'd like to also, if we have a chance, hear about opportunities to be more inclusive of consumer input in this process. So the Dietary Guidelines for Americans are jointly issued and updated every 5 years by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Health and Human Services. The purpose of the guidelines is to provide authoritative advice based on a current independent review of science. The guidelines have focused on the American population ages 2 and above, and they provide food-based recommendations designed to promote health and prevent disease. This is rather than treat disease, and this makes our work different than certain other systematic review entities that provide clinical guidance. While the target audience does include the general public, there is a specific focus on federal programs, policymakers, and health professionals. So the policy document is actually supported by a scientific advisory report. And the scientific advisory report includes different types of evidence. So there's 4 that we use. There's original systematic reviews, the use of high-quality existing reports, data analysis, and food pattern modeling. Again, I'm with the NEL, and we do the original systematic reviews, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. The Nutrition Evidence Library is created to facilitate systematic reviews that inform federal nutrition policies and programs. We were set up to meet the Data Integrity Act of 2001, which mandates that all agencies ensure quality, objectivity, utility, and integrity of information used to form federal guidance. Part of that means that we have to ensure that not only is our process rigorous and that it minimizes bias, but also, very importantly, that it's transparent. So all aspects of our work can be found on our website, nel.gov. Our systematic review teams typically include 2 NEL analysts, and that's so that we can peer review each other's work and do a quality control check. Typically 8 subject matter experts, a stakeholder group, 2 librarians that also do a peer review of each other's work, and evidence abstractors. For the stakeholder group, I just noted that we only sometimes use a stakeholder group. There actually isn't a stakeholder group for the dietary guidelines. And this is an area where other systematic review entities may do it a little bit differently, and a place where there could be an opportunity for consumers to sit on the stakeholder group. Generally, when we do have a stakeholder group, it includes just federal stakeholders, because our systematic reviews, the end user typically is the federal programs, and it's to inform federal policy. But this is an opportunity for us in terms of expanding the reach of our reviews, and because ultimately it is to improve the American health, having the end user as a stakeholder in the process is an opportunity for us for improvement. We have a fairly standard 6-step process that I'll talk briefly about each step. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with systematic reviews, but if you are, you've seen these before. But I will mention that we have initiated a structured continuous quality advancement initiative. And this is where we're really evaluating the process that we use now and looking to identify opportunities to strengthen the process. And I just wanted to highlight that because while I'm here today, I would be interested in your feedback and your perspective and how to incorporate more of that consumer voice into the process. So step 1 is topic identification and question development. Obviously, this is a critical step. We have to get the question right. So this step involves identifying, prioritizing, and then refining topics and questions that are relevant to federal food and nutrition policies and programs. Again, all of our questions are meant to inform policy, and that's very important. Anytime we're doing a prioritizing the questions or refining the questions, that's what we're looking at to see, is this going to impact federal policy and programs? The step also involves a description of the problem or issue with background information, including rationales and methodological considerations as the process moves forward. And again, the last bullet reflects the important decisional dilemmas in public health nutrition guidance. So once the question is formulated and refined, we go on to the second step, which is identifying the literature base that we're going to use to address that question. This is an iterative process where first a search strategy is developed and a literature search is conducted, which is based on an inclusion-exclusion criteria, which is set up up front to again minimize bias in the process. Dual screening occurs also to minimize bias, and every part of this step is available on our website. This is also really important. We get a lot of questions about why an article was or was not included in a systematic review. So you can go to the website. This is meant to be completely reproducible. Anybody can take the search strategy. It outlines the databases used, the search terms used, the date range that we were looking at, and also it shows all of the articles that came up. Any excluded article, there's a rationale for exclusion. So this is a completely transparent step. Once we have the articles that are included in the review, we need to extract that information. So we have evidence abstractors that are national service volunteers that are trained in data extraction. They all hold an advanced degree in nutrition science or public health. So they're trained to do this in a similar way, once again to minimize bias. And we also do a risk of bias assessment to determine if there is any systematic error that exists that would either over or underestimate study results. And this is done using a tool that we have developed called the Now Bias Assessment Tool. And this is an area where we feel like it's a strong area for us. We've actually developed this tool based on some existing validated tools. We had an expert panel, international panel, put this together. It was informed also by the Cochrane collaboration and Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So we feel like it's a very strong tool. It can be tailored to assess risk of bias for different study designs. So there are different questions for random controlled trials and cohort studies, which is very important with our type of research, with nutrition research. So again, this is an area that we feel is a strength of our process, but we're also currently reassessing how to improve this. So we're looking at updating some of the instructions and also how the scoring is conducted and reported. So once we have all of the evidence abstracted into a data grid, this then gets written up into a data synthesis. So first there's a description of evidence which the NEL abstractors prepare, and this talks about study characteristics and the research findings, but there is no synthesis at this stage. That then gets passed on to our experts that are on the review team. The experts then compare and contrast the studies, look for commonalities and limitations within the body of evidence, and they conduct the evidence synthesis. The experts are then also responsible for giving the body of evidence a grade. So we use a grading rubric. There are 4 grades that any systematic review or any body of evidence can be assigned: strong, moderate, limited, and not assignable. And the elements that they use to evaluate this are listed on the slide. So we have that risk of bias, which is the measure of internal validity, the number of studies, the sample size of this study. So again, these are study characteristics that relate to the quality of the study. the consistency of findings. Did they all say the same thing? Were they different? If they were different, why might they have been different? The impact of the results, and also how generalizable was the study to the US population. So all of this information is combined and interpreted, and the experts give each systematic review a grade. The grade then helps inform the conclusion statement. So the conclusion statement is a concise statement that answers the question. So I'll show you an example of one. It directly answers the question. It includes the strength of the evidence, and it identifies any particular methodological approaches or considerations that should be thought of when interpreting the conclusion. And it may also include something focusing on areas of agreement, and may also acknowledge disagreement in the body of evidence as appropriate. So here's an example for the systematic review question that says, what is the relationship between the use of diet and weight self-monitoring strategies and body weight outcomes in adults? So the conclusion statement starts with the strength of the evidence, so moderate evidence, and then it goes on to say primarily overweight adult women living in the United States, because in that set of evidence, most of the studies only looked at adult women. So they felt like that was important to highlight. Then it indicates that self-monitoring of diet weight in both, and here's where they added more context to the conclusion statement, in the context of a behavioral weight management intervention, incorporating goal setting and performance feedback, improves. So then they go on to answer the question, what is the relationship? It improves weight loss outcomes. So it's a very packed sentence filled with lots of nuggets of information, but it clearly addresses the systematic review question at hand. The last step of the process is to identify research recommendations, and this is really important because it can further advise federal policies and program leaders, but also further our knowledge in any particular area. As I've mentioned, everything is visible on our website, which is free to the public. So in conclusion, the NEL process, we feel is a very rigorous, transparent process. There are opportunities for us to strengthen our process and have more consumer involvement throughout the process. And comment periods is another thing I didn't have an opportunity to talk about, but that's one way that we do try to get consumer feedback. And also, I'm going to be turning this over to Jessica Donzie Black to talk about the politics side of it. So we put together this whole evidence report, and that goes into a publication, so our Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, but then the advisory report, like I said in the beginning, informs the policy. So that systematic review is not policy itself. It then leads into the policy document. And that's where it really gets interesting. So with that, I will hand it over to Jessica, and I look forward to talking about this more later.